thing that I really loved about both of these was the what I was calling like the multiplicity of voices in the works. In short story collections, maybe that's to be expected. There's a lot of stories, a lot of different characters. But even within each story of Alligator, I would say each story for the most part, there's multiple speakers. And then above us, the speaker goes from a writing I to a we, which is not maybe a speaker voice that we see that often, like a collective, to movable sisters who, for people who haven't read the book yet, it's explained that each sister is supposed to be taken as one as well as separately. So they're interchangeable. Their experiences are interchangeable to a certain extent. So for each of you, what is including this polyphony do to individual characters as well as the cast of characters as a whole? What can it reveal about them, about perspective, even about the reader's perspective? If Dima, you'd like to go first. Oh, you're still muted, Dima. Sorry.
Sorry, my fault. I think on one level, it allows maybe a particular story to become more universal, or even vice versa. So by that I mean, like, for example, there's a story in the book that's about 9/11, but which is a big macro kind of world event. But by really kind of filtering it down into, the voice of this one character, it also, we get a glimpse into the effect on the individual that a very large event can have. And in Alligator, it's kind of along those same lines. The event of this lynching has kind of rippled through time and space to affect so many people, not only the children of the lynched couple and their children's children, but also there's ramifications to what the racialization of Arab Americans at that time and in the years to follow. There are ramifications to how their assimilation or attempts to become white, how does that impact other people of color in the US? So while this couple, were the victims of racialized violence, they then maybe their lynching kind of instigates their progeny to become the oppressors down the line. So that's kind of what I was interested in exploring, and the multiplicity of voices allowed me to kind of look at one event from different perspectives, and I guess that would be inviting the reader to also do that as well.
For me, coming from a large Afghani family, I lived and grew up with a multiplicity of voices. There were always people around, and for an introvert, that could at points be really, really tough. There weren't many quiet places to find in the house, but yeah, we had my family of 7. Someone was always home. You were never alone, and then we had parties all the time. We'd invite as many as 60 or 80 people to the house. This wasn't once in a while. This was like at least once a month, sometimes 2 or 3 times. And we'd go to weddings and others' parties. So there's voices always around. And it's funny, my partner says that I can room and hear like 4 conversations simultaneously, listening to them all. And it comes from that. And I think that just, it tunes your ear to hearing those voices everywhere. And there's another thing for me personally. I've always described personhood to everything, including the inorganic in our environment. And so, yeah, that comes through in the book. The moon has a perspective, the sun has a perspective. He longs for the grass on the earth. And the book speaks to the reader, the narrator speaks directly to the reader. There's just their voices everywhere. And I feel like that's kind of how we live, right? Like if you listen again, they're there.
Great, thank you so much, both of you, for participating in this discussion. As you all can tell, I just adore both of these books. So if you're in Pittsburgh, I'm going to be pushing these in your hands constantly for the next probably year at least. So a couple of user questions from Robert. Robert wanted to say, love the reading. Both pieces have such lyricism and prose rhythm, and is also asking for both of you. After the books were published, did readers point out any patterns or interpretations that surprised you?
For me, I feel like, my book came out in mid-April, and everything's been shut down. So I'm not hearing a whole lot, just because, so many events were canceled. We're not out there. And I feel like if things were happening maybe more often in person, then I might hear that. I wish I had an answer for that.
Same, I guess, in that I haven't had a lot of feedback from readers. I guess what has surprised me, maybe I shouldn't be so surprised, is that in kind of some of, the reviews, or kind of I guess in some of the reviews, the book has been called a book of migrant literature or refugee literature. And that's been interesting, but I guess maybe to be expected, in that the stories in the book to me are very much American stories, and that's what I had kind of set out to write. So but I do think that a lot of times, if a book is about non-white characters, that it's very difficult for certain readers to perceive it as an American book. And so even though one of the stories, maybe two of the stories, kind of deals with characters who might be refugees, it's never really explicitly said. That's not what the book as a whole is about, and I wouldn't claim to kind of write that experience, but that's how it's being read. And so that is really interesting, and I think it definitely says more about that, what a reader is coming to a book like this with. So that's I guess that's been the most surprising thing.
Yeah, and it's something I think about with both of your books, that that pigeonholing can be very unfair and do a disservice to the vast multitude of things that both of these books are doing within them. So I've appreciated getting to talk about all of these other different facets. We have a question for Fowzia, as an Afghan-American woman. The person who's asking the question, I've never seen or read a book like yours. I'm so grateful to you for your work. I'm wondering if you can share more about the challenges and joys you experienced in writing your story and your family's stories.
Gosh, there's so many. Maybe especially because it was such a long process, and like Dima, I'm not here to represent an entire culture and educate another culture. I'm writing. I'm a writer, and I love story, and I feel like the reason I'm writing this particular story is because it's my experience. But there is, I do feel and have always felt a certain responsibility to write for those who can't speak for themselves, who died in the war, very specifically the innocent men, women, and children who died, who suffered during this war that, they still are. This is an ongoing war that's just morphing over the past 40 plus years. So that, yes, there was a lot of difficulty in facing those aspects of the storytelling of again, listening to the dead and putting down their suffering on the page so people can see, because what happened and continues to happen in Afghanistan or places like Syria and Iraq, or this is going to happen. It's been happening for our entire history on this planet. It will continue. There's always going to be war. There's always going to be immigration as a result of it. And that, really wonderful things can miraculously come out of that. I think some of our best art comes from people in exile. And yeah, it's a strange line to walk. You want to be true to your art, because for me, language is like the most important thing. And at the same time, you are telling a story that represents a population who, for the most part, do not have a voice. Excuse me. Especially in the West, our history is written by Westerners. The war is the history that's put down about the war. It's put down by Russians, by Europeans, by Americans, and we don't know who has even visited the country who's writing these things down. So there is that strange responsibility to put down what I witnessed as someone who was actually there, and not for very long. It's just the first year of the war, but the suffering has continued to come through relatives, through other people's stories as well.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more, if that's okay with both of you. It's a question about, so there's a reading group that'll be discussing Above Us the Milky Way this coming Wednesday, and they had a lot of thoughts about the nonlinear time within the book. And I would love to open this up to both of you, because I feel like it's something that that play with time and space, like this fluidity with time and space, occurs in both books. And for me, that's something that always really excites me, because I love reading something that leaves what I'm just going to call the confines of like traditional American fiction, like especially like white male American fiction, which is just like linear, realistic, like family story, whatever. And both these books like just push hard against that and just keep dipping in and out of more of a circular time. So I'm wondering if both of you wouldn't mind speaking to like, how you use time and space and how you conceptualize it as you're writing.
I can go first, and I'll just respond to, I see the question here, to another aspect of the question. Did the tradition of oral storytelling influence Above Us the Milky Way, the style and the structure? I wish I could say that it did. I do have very keen memories of being told fairy tales when I was a little girl, and it's really where my love for story comes from. But there are very few, and I think that in terms of this nonlinear movement, it has more to do with memory. The book is about memory, and I think that when we're working with memory, I mean, everything is there all at once. There is no time. It is very much, in fact, circular times. You can dip in and out of different memories and make these connections, stitch them together in ways that like your typical male narrator might not. And I think it's a really, I don't know, it just gives you a lot of access to a lot of different things when you just take all that structure away, when you pull time out of the equation and just dive into memory alone. It's how it works in our minds. I mean, we look at something, it triggers a memory. We smell something, a memory is triggered. These things all exist all the time. And in the book, about halfway through, there's a piece that says all of the days were one, that the sisters are really just living this cyclical moment over and over again, that they exist in a moment in time. And I think that, again, that's how memory works.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I would agree with Fowzia on that, in that for a lot of the characters in my book, their memories aren't really things of the past. They're really informing their present moment to moment, and how they're reacting to what's happening in their lives, and how their identity is shaped minute to minute, who they're becoming. So it's something that's quite alive for them, that past and present kind of collapse, and there's not an easy way to separate them. And that, I guess, that fluidity is also to kind of to evoke a truth, which is our present is very much shaped by our past. And so in the title story, Alligator, I'm telling the story of a Syrian American couple that's lynched, but I'm also telling the story of African American lynchings. I'm also telling the story of, genocide of an Indigenous American population. I'm going back in time to also tell what's happening now. So there's no way to separate these stories. They all kind of collapse. They're really the one story. And I think one of the characters in one of the stories says that is, in the end, we're just telling the same story kind of over and over, but different iterations of it.
Great. That was perfect. Yeah. All right. We're just about at 2:00. I feel like that's a good place to end. I don't know if either of you have anything else you want to say or mention or shout out, or Molly, if you had anything else.
I would just like to say that I've just recently been reading Dima's work through this collection, and she's got a huge fan in Denton, Texas. Really, I so much appreciated her work, and I mentioned to her before we started the program with the audience that I felt right at home. That there's so much I recognize in structure and content, and culturally, it was really a pleasure to come into it.
Thank you, Fowzia. I mean, huge fan here as well. As I was saying before the conversation here started, is your book isn't just for anyone who hasn't seen it yet. It's not. It's beautiful because of the language, but it's also, I am a huge fan of book as object, and it is a beautiful work of art. And the care that's gone into assembling it, I think, is really clear. And it's the kind of attention that as a reader I really look for. So hearing that it took you 10 years, like in no way am I surprised. And I think it's such a gift for a reader to receive a book that's taken that long, when so many books, are kind of churned out. So yeah, so a huge recommendation from me as well.
Great. Yeah, Molly, I don't know if you had anything else.
Nothing really to add, just except to say thank you all for doing this on a Saturday afternoon. Well, I know it's evening for you, Dima. So thank you, Dima and Fowzia, for doing this. It was really great to have you two in conversation, and it was definitely needed in midst of everything that's going on. I think it's important that we continue reading and telling stories. So thank you again, Anna, for all the work that you did.
Yeah.
And thank you, Sarah from Deep Vellum as well, for all of her help. So yeah, I don't have anything else to add, just to say thank you. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you to both of
Thank
you.
you. Thank you to both of you.
Wonderful questions. Yeah.
Oh, of course, anytime.
All right, well.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Molly.
Yeah, of course. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll all be in touch soon, I'm sure. Yeah.
Great.
Bye, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.